History is forged in legendary tales, yet true historical reality lives within human complexity. When examining the 17th century, Western Europe's cultural imagination is completely anchored by a figure wrapped in solemn grandeur and deep introspection. We encounter Louis XIV, the Sun King, at the twilight of his existence, a formidable, aging monarch pacing the vast, glittering halls of Versailles, cut off in a self-made realm, staring out with a rigid, calculating look. He served as the anchor for an era of immense upheaval, steering France through the profound trials of absolute centralization and expanding its reach toward the Rhine. Yet this iconic image of the haughty, absolute autocrat was entirely shaped by his later decades, functioning as protective armor to shield a soul driven by artistic ardor, volatile feelings, and iron resolve. To judge him solely by his opulent chateau or his final struggles is to overlook the fascinating path of a young prince who was deeply shaken by civil revolt, only to rise, challenge the harsh realities of his era, and completely redefine modern France. His early years began beneath the immense burden of traditional royal expectations. Born September 5, 1638, at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, Louis entered a world dictated by the cold calculations of statecraft. Guided by his mother, Anne of Austria and Cardinal Mazarin, the young prince's upbringing turned into a grueling, terrifying gauntlet of civil warfare known as the Fronde, engineered to strip away any sign of vulnerability. Driven from his capital by night, he endured constant political danger while grasping the extreme fragility of his crown. This early trauma within a fractured kingdom aimed to crush Louis's independent drive, ensuring he would remain a predictable puppet for the nobility once he took the throne. Yet the court severely underestimated the inner strength of the young ruler. Underneath his outwardly compliant shell burned a fierce stubbornness and deep resentment toward aristocratic chaos. Louis sought refuge in a private world of imagination, dance, and nature, cultivating an internal sanctuary of total order. The true trial came in March 1661 when Mazarin died, leaving a 22-year-old Louis to govern a fractured realm alone. The striking young king greeted the news with dread mixed with immediate resolve. His opening move was to declare he would act as his own chief minister, funneling royal funds into grand cultural projects. He embraced this newfound authority enthusiastically, aiming to transform his capital into the cultural epicenter of the world. However, this pursuit of an absolute utopia sparked his reign's first major crisis, plunging his administration into constant conflict. Late in the 17th century, foreign policy exploded into expansionist wars that united Europe against French dominance. Facing fierce pushback, Louis endured exhausting military campaigns that tested his political visions. It was an era of immense psychological pressure. The heavy toll of endless wars drained the national treasury and hurt his subjects, painting him as a destructive conqueror to his critics. Surrounded by cautious advisors and an exhausted public, the monarch refused to crack under pressure, mastering the harsh mechanics of governance rather than acting as a mere figurehead. The ultimate cementation of French autonomy arrived through total cultural and political centralization. Turning away from the turbulent streets of Paris, Louis channeled his iron willpower into massive architectural creation at Versailles. Expanding a humble hunting lodge, he built a breathtaking palace that broke architectural norms. His boldest move was forcing the French nobility to live inside Versailles, a brilliant stroke of statecraft that subdued aristocratic defiance through luxury and rigid protocol rather than brute force. Beyond his architectural marvels, Louis weaponized culture as an instrument of statecraft, transforming Versailles into the cultural capital of Europe. He surrounded himself with brilliant luminaries of the age, commissioning timeless plays by Molière and Racine, immersive musical masterpieces by Jean-Baptiste Lully, and groundbreaking scientific academies. By positioning himself as the ultimate patron of the arts and sciences, he ensured that French taste, fashion, and language dictated the standards of every European court, turning cultural hegemony into a silent yet devastating form of political dominance. Daily life inside this gilded cage was governed by a suffocating, microscopic web of ritual known as etiquette, which turned the nobility into compliant courtiers. Every movement, from waking up to dining and retiring, was transformed into a sacred theatrical performance where proximity to the king meant power, and a missed nod meant social ruin. By trapping the proudest aristocratic families in this relentless pursuit of royal favor, Louis effectively neutralized any threat of armed rebellion, replacing the chaotic battlefield of feudal politics with a high-stakes parlor game where he held every card. This obsession with absolute control extended beyond human subjects into nature itself, famously embodied by the sprawling, symmetrical gardens of Versailles designed by André Le Nôtre. By bending unruly forests, carving grand canals, and forcing fountains to defy gravity through complex hydraulic engineering, Louis sought to demonstrate that human reason and royal will could conquer even the natural world. It was the ultimate physical metaphor for his reign, an awe-inspiring illusion of absolute mastery, meticulously manicured to conceal the underlying fragility of an empire stretched to its limits. Beyond the rigid protocol of state, Louis's private life was famously defined by a succession of high-profile romantic liaisons and official mistresses who held immense influence over the court. Figures like the gentle Louise de la Vallière and the dazzling, sharp-witted Madame de Montespan transformed royal romance into an institution in its own right, the maîtresse en titre. These relationships were never purely private matters. They were public spectacles woven tightly into the political theater of Versailles, where favor, jealousy, and ambition collided, directly shaping the social hierarchy and testing the boundaries of religious morality. This drive for absolute uniformity also manifested in his domestic and religious policies, most notoriously through the 1685 Revocation of the Edict of Nantes. Driven by a fierce desire for religious conformity under the banner of one king, one law, one faith, Louis systematically dismantled the rights of French Protestants, forcing hundreds of thousands of Huguenots into exile. While praised by his Catholic court at the time, this severe blow crippled segments of the French economy and alienated Protestant powers across Europe, revealing the rigid inflexibility that often accompanied his grand vision. Amidst these structural changes, Louis experienced a complex personal life marked by isolation. Bound by a political marriage, he balanced official favorites while fiercely safeguarding his dignity. Following personal heartbreaks, including the deaths of most of his legitimate children and grandchildren, he secretly married Madame de Montespan, leading a more devout, solemn existence centered on state duties and religious piety. His later years were defined by staggering financial strains and the grueling War of the Spanish Succession. This relentless cycle of conflict drained national resources, yet working alongside ministers like Colbert, he projected absolute majesty, transforming his court into a shrine of artistic supremacy. By carefully balancing his autocratic duties with daily governance, he built an enduring institutional network, earning the moniker Sun King, even as his government struggled financially. This grand illusion faced severe tests in the early 1700s with severe famine and economic collapse, compounded by the tragic deaths of successive heirs. Frail and burdened by grief, Louis met his fading years with stoic discipline as he watched the royal line shrink to a single toddler. Illness struck the aging king in late summer 1715. On September 1st, 1715, at age 77, the monarch passed away within Versailles, closing the longest reign in European history and leaving his people in deep shock. Transported to the Basilica of Saint-Denis, he was laid to rest in the royal necropolis, cementing his legacy according to traditional French custom. Louis XIV was a ruler of stark contradictions, deeply committed to state order, yet detached from the human cost of his wars, and fiercely devoted to his divine right to rule. He stepped into a chaotic, rebellious world and forged a legacy of absolute power and cultural dominance. Ultimately, the weary king fading within Versailles and the brilliant young sovereign who seized the crown were one and the same, a leader who walked the fine line between personal endurance and state survival, leaving an indelible imprint on Western Europe.